is celebrated as the World Book Day. This date is chosen because it's the day on which Shakespeare is believed to have been born, and it's also the same day when he died. It's the date of his birth and the date of his death. Coincidentally, he was born and he died on the same date, 23rd April. This is the reason why 23rd April is chosen as the World Book Day. For that occasion, we are holding this discussion because in the world there are more and more people who prefer to watch a film rather than read the book of the same story. More and more people feel more attracted to the film and rather than take the trouble of reading the whole book. But fortunately there are still a lot of people who read books, enjoy them, and there is always this discussion among film lovers of cinema and lovers of book, which is better when a film is made. Was the film as good as the book? Was the book better than the film? And so on. Of course, there is no real answer because each one has their own view. So this evening's program we will have it as follows. I will first give a little introduction to this subject, after which Samir Sarkar, who is a film producer who was involved in the shooting or in the production of the film Life of Pi, which is based on a book called Life of Pi by Ian Martel, and the story is set in Pondichéry, which is why this book is so close to our heart, or it is so important to us. And we have the good fortune that Samir lives here and he knows the inside story of how this film was made. So he will then tell us how, from the point of view of a film producer, how a film script is made or how a film adaptation is made from a novel. Now, I'm just going to make a clarification that I'm only going to discuss novels. I'm not going to talk of short stories or mythological stories or autobiographies or historicals. I'm just going to stick to novels and literary work of a novel, how it is adapted to the screen and made into a film. So then he will tell us about how this, he will show us two short clips on this subject, and then he will talk to us about how this film was made, after which we will take questions from you. So let me just make a general introduction to the subject. As we know, books have existed in the world much before films came along. So historically, they have been for far longer and they have a lot of importance. However, cinema is relatively newer than books. It has a mass consumption. A lot of people in the world, if you look at the number of people who read books and the number of people who watch films, it's definitely much, much higher. The number of people who watch films is much greater than the number of people who read books. So, this way of taking a book and changing it, turning it into a film, has been there right from the beginning. Right from the beginning when cinema came into being, this has always happened, that some film producers or directors have taken a book and turned it into a film. Those who could not read, those who were illiterate, for them this was a very easy way of enjoying that same story. Because books, in order to read and enjoy a book, you must have the skill of reading. You must be literate. You must have this liking for reading a book for pleasure. There's a big difference between people who read books for their classes, for their school and college life, and people who read a book for pleasure. So, a book is accessible to people who are literate and who love reading for their pleasure. Whereas a film can be watched by someone who has no skills whatsoever, completely illiterate, and still watch a film and enjoy it. This probably is the reason why the Indian film industry has had such huge success. It's an industry, thousands of people work in it, and it has had so much success because India for but they could sit and watch a film and enjoy it thoroughly. So, but what is from the point of view of the person who is making the film, there is a reason why they would choose a book and turn it into a film. Even the great master Satyajit Ray, his early films were all based on published works, either novels or short stories. Much later he started writing his own screenplays, but his earlier films were all based on published works. His very most well-known works are based on Rabindranath Tagore's novels, Charulata and Gauribaide, which are based on his very well-known novels. And he had said, that the reason why he took a published work, a novel, to make it into a film was because he felt there was a very, the risk that is being taken by a filmmaker when he invests his money, he has to recover that money. And Satyajit Ray said, if I take a published work, I'm minimizing that risk. I'm making sure that at least some people will come to watch this film. Those who have read the book are very likely to come and watch the film because it is already a known story. This was the reason he gave why he chose at the beginning to take, for example, Bharat Patanjali the Bapu trilogy was already published, and he felt that I'm taking a work which is known and I'm going to turn it into a film. So I'm assured that at least some people will come and watch it. This screen adaptation work has been done in Hollywood as well as in Indian film industry. And I'm going to specify Indian film industry because there were three major centers of Indian cinema in India. One was evidently Bombay, Mumbai. The other was Calcutta, and the third one was Chennai, Madras. These three centers were the more important filmmaking industries, and in all three of them, they did work on adaptations from novels. Sometimes the same novel would be adapted once in Bengal, once in the Hindi film industry, once in the Tamil film industry, or in the Telugu film industry, because it had already had some success. The most famous example of this is the book of Devdas, which was made in Bengali once, twice. It was made several times in the film industry. A copy of it was made in some South Indian film industries as well. So, this thing has been around for a very long time. And, of course, in changing the film, the book into the film, there is a whole process of changing this whole text into what will become the film. So, it's not a very easy thing to do because books and films are two completely different mediums, two completely different formats of storytelling. Cinema is a visual medium, audio-visual medium. So when you take a story from a novel, you have to set it, put it into that format in which it can be seen as images. There are many things that you can do in a book that you can't do in a film. For example, particularly all the thought, all that goes on in a person's mind can't be shown that directly on screen. You have to find a means of translating that into images, how to show it. There's also the time frame. A book can be very thick, can be very long, but until now, until the OTT platforms came along, until the films started being shown on the internet platforms, there was also the time constraint. You had to squeeze it into the run time of 2 hours or 2.5 hours or so. At one time it was 3 hours. Indian films, running time was often 3 hours. So you had to squash it into that much time. Now with the web series, now with the OTT platforms, that freedom is there. You can take as much time as you want. But the book and the film, person. I can sit down in front of my laptop and I can start typing and I write my book. I can take my pen, I can write it on my piece of paper, and I can write my book. I can change what I don't like, I can rewrite it, I can revise it. After which I can send it to my publisher. The publisher will give it to my editor. The editor will go through it. He may ask for some changes. He may ask me to rephrase this or that. And that is that. After which it is printed and it is sold. So, at the point of creation, there is one person who sits and creates that whole story. And the person who creates doesn't need a lot of money to write that. He can, the means, if he can sit and write, that's fine. Whatever he needs for the writing, that's fine. That much he needs. But a film is made by a team, by a big team, and there's a huge amount of money invested in it. And everybody has an input in that. A lot of people's work goes into one creation, which is the film. So, a book which is written by one person gets transformed into a work on which so many people have worked, and each person's work has some significance in that final product. So, it's not such an easy thing. And sometimes it has happened in the past that the author who gives the rights for making the films quite often would say, I'm not happy with the way you made the film. You changed this, you changed that. So there is a limit, we don't know. I mean, it depends on each filmmaker how much he can change the original text from which he's taking. How much liberty can he take in making his own adaptation. That is again something that can be discussed, and each one has a different point of view. So now I'm going to, having given you a basic idea of what is involved, I will ask Samir to say what he has to say. Samir, I hope I have not said anything wrong. Fine?
Absolutely fine. So I basically am a producer, and but when I worked in Life of Pi, this was 10 years ago. I was at the beginning of starting my production house and stuff. So I'm going to speak to you about my personal experience with Life of Pi. Being on the film for 8 years, I'll talk to you about that. But just before that, because I'm not a screenwriter, I'm going to look at the entire thing more from a producer's point of view. So I requested a friend of mine, Siddharth Jain, who has a company called Story Inc. And he's the largest, I think, library of, he has rights for the largest number of novels in India that can be adapted to films. So for example, a Netflix comes to Siddharth, or XYZ comes to Siddharth and says, do you have anything interesting for me that I could adapt into a film? And then Siddharth kind of has optioned these books. So this word option is very important. Option is when you kind of take the rights of a book and so that it can be adapted to screen. So an author decides, or the publisher decides, how the book needs to be optioned. So for example, you write books, Sunayana, and I want to make a film out of that book that you write. Your publisher or yourself tells me, okay, I will give you 2 years. Within these 2 years, if you can't make the film, then I'm allowed to put the book back into the market for somebody else to kind of make the film. So it could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 3 years. Because what happens often is, I write 10 books, I have money, I buy the rights of 10 books, option the rights of 10 books, and then I make only one of them or two of them. The rest of the 8 keep waiting, and finally no film, and your time passes by, and time is everything in a certain way. Some novels are classics, other novels are more time bound, and then you lose the rights of that book. I mean, the author kind of is stuck with the producer for longer than necessary. So the word option is a very important thing, and I'm going to bring that example back once I talk about Life of Pi. So Siddharth has done a little clip for us, explaining what he does. He recently, so with the advent of the OTT platforms, Netflix, Amazon, Sony, the entire the entire adaptation of books, because there's so much work being churned out, and original scripts take so much more time to write. Adapting books, auctioning books has become a huge success. A lot of people are auctioning their books. So Siddharth, for example, from being the owner of this company, he turned into a producer, and he produced this series called Trial by Fire. I don't know if any one of you have watched it on Netflix.
Actually, this Trial by Fire is a story of a cinema hall which caught fire, and a lot of people died. They were trapped inside the cinema hall. So it was written as a book, and after that it was made into a web series. Is that?
Absolutely.
Yes, so while I was talking of the background of it, what I didn't emphasize enough is that when a producer takes a book and turns it into a film, it's a huge advantage for him, because the hard work of writing the whole thing has already been done by somebody. You just have to adapt it.
So, and then I'm also going to talk to you about a little bit of the technicals and how you kind of convert a book or a short story into a script. There is a certain methodology. So along with you, when we talk about the 3 acts, maybe you can explain 3 acts. There are a few points that one has to keep in mind, and I'm going to talk to you about all of them. So now you have to remember that a book can be, like Sunayana said, it could be from a 100-pager to a 200 to an 800-pager to maybe a 1,000-pager, you see. But when you want to make a 2-hour film, you have to concise the information, take what is important, look at the entire graph of the story, and make it interesting for a film-going audience. Now, one interesting thing, maybe I don't know how many of you know this, 1 page of a script is equal to 1 minute of screen time at an average. So when you write 1 page of a script with dialogues, it's equal to 1 minute of screen time. So that's how that's somewhere concising how complicated it might be to kind of adapt a novel or a story to screen. So for whoever is interested in kind of exploring this option of writing a screenplay into writing a kind of adapting a book into a screenplay, there are a few points to remember. One very important point is to have a software, because there is a certain methodology to write a script. There are the descriptions of the scenes, there are the dialogues, and there are the movements of the actors. So one is important to read screenwriting books, very, very important. Then you must try and read screenplays. So you read screenwriting books to learn the methodology. You read screenplays to see how those screenplays are written. Then of course, you must watch movies and start working on outlines, because you shouldn't immediately jump into writing a script. You should first test the script by writing the outline of the film. And then, of course, when you get into the writing of the film, there is something called 3 acts. So, Sunayana, maybe you can explain the 3 acts.
You see, in theatre, especially in Shakespearean theatre, we have 5 acts. But in cinema, we talk about 3 acts. Basically, it's a story which has a beginning, a middle, and an end. When we teach story writing to students, we always tell them your story must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's basically that. So in the first act, you introduce the situation, you introduce the characters, you introduce the whole background of what's going to happen. In the second act, you have the point of conflict, you have the event which comes and becomes a problem, and the third act is usually when the conflict is resolved and everything comes to an end. In every story there is a conflict. That conflict is the point, the turning point. It can be a conflict between a group and a group, it can be a conflict between a person and a group, it can be a conflict between a person and a person. It can also be a conflict between a person and himself, as it is in this book. So that's that difficulty which comes and which the protagonist has to overcome comes usually in the second act. And the third one is how everything is resolved and how it ends.
And then how you sell, like how you go to a producer and sell a film. He doesn't want to listen to the entire story first. He has to be hooked on with a certain quick introduction to the subject. So there's something called the log line. Every movie has a log line, which is like 2 sentences that describes the entire film, and that's actually the hook. So once I get into the details of the life of Pai, I'm going to tell you how this entire journey happened. It's a personal story also. So you realize it's pretty technical. It's not as simple as it seems to adapt books into screenplays. Let's go into less technical stuff and more interesting stuff. So Nana, for you, what would be your 3 best adaptations of Hollywood films, and if French films, if you have in mind?
French film, I don't know, but Hollywood, you see, I'm not that young, so I have my best films are old films. So one of my favorite adaptations is Alfred Hitchcock's adaptation of Rebecca, which is a very, very successful novel written by Daphne du Maurier. It's a black and white film, and it's one of those adaptations which I felt was very close to the book. When you have a book which is very popular, you have your own imagination in which you see the story. And when the film is made, it's the imagination of the filmmaker which is his way of seeing the thing. So it's just one person's view. If 10 people read a book, there will be 10 different versions in their heads of that same story. So evidently, if you have enjoyed the book, you have your own version of the story in your mind. But Rebecca by Alfred Hitchcock came very close to the enjoyment of the book. One other thing which I have enjoyed very much in non-Indian films is a book called a film called The Namesake, which is made by Meera Nair, and it's based on a novel written by Jhumpa Lahiri, who's an Indian, and definitely the film is better than the book. There are a lot of things that you don't think of when you're reading the book, which become so real when you're watching the film. One of the things that struck me in this adaptation by Meera Nair is the way she shows, for example, we had this fantastic actor called Irfan Khan who died a couple of years ago. He plays the role of a Bengali man who was moved to the USA and was living there. And when he speaks English, he has this marked Bengali accent, which when I was reading the book, I didn't even think. But Meera Nair gave him that one thing, and that touches you so much, because immediately you feel his alienation from the country from where he has gone. And I had the good fortune to attend a Q&A with Irfan Khan, where he was asked this question: how did you manage that Bengali accent when you were acting in The Namesake? And he said, there was somebody employed to train me how to say that. That much care that Meera Nair took to make him speak in the way she thought he would speak, which you don't even think when you're reading the book. So that, I think, is one of the very successful adaptations, screen adaptations. In Indian films, I think, actually it's not a novel, but I have liked the way Vishal Bharadwaj has adapted 2 or 3 of Shakespeare's plays into the Indian context. He has made 3 films which are based on Macbeth, Hamlet, and I can't remember the third one, and they are so close to the Indian life. The way he has taken that story and set it in Indian context, it's a really fantastic screenplay that he has done. He jokes very often and he says, the plot was Shakespeare's, I built a house on it. Making a pun on the word plot. So it really is the imagination of the filmmaker who can completely change it if he wants. Of course, there are. If you look at the various kinds of films, recently there has been even now they are showing Pondichéry 1 and 2. Even that is a book adaptation, but he has done it he himself says, Maniratnam says, I have had to do it in 2 parts because it's actually 5 volumes of it. You can't do it in 1. I'd rather stretch it out into 2 rather than make it into 1. So even that, how has he adapted the vision of the man who wrote Pondichéry? It's his vision, it's Maniratnam's vision, the way he sees it.
So I think French film-wise, I think Cyrano de Bergerac is one, and classic, of course, Les Miserables, and then there's The Lovers, which Jean-Jacques Hano made into this fantastic film. So these 3 come to my mind. But Hollywood, of course, one of the most fabulous adaptations was Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series.
Yes, of course, Harry Potter.
The books were fantastic, the films were even more fantastic.
Yes.
And then, for me personally, I love The English Patient. I don't know if you've seen the English Patient. Schindler's List, which was, also Steven Spielberg, is an adaptation of a book. And Andy basically adapted 2 books. So I'm going to now get into the story of the life of Pi. Andy did one film that was Sense and Sensibility, Jane Austen's book, and then of course The Life of Pi. Now I got involved in The Life of Pi 8 years before the film was made, and I did realize that I had a relationship with the book even before the film was made. So there was an uncle of mine, I grew up in that house, his name was Chiman Bhai Patel, and today his house is called Villa, it was called Villa Bayu, now they've changed the name again. It's right opposite the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Library, and right on the beach, now it's a hotel. So that used to be his house, and he used to own petrol pumps, but his big hobby was photography. So he had this, he had this photo shop where he used to sell cameras and reels and develop pictures and stuff like that. And Jan Martel, who's the author of The Life of Pi, Jan Martel, Canadian, had come to Pondi and he was writing this book in Pondi. And he used to sit at the India Coffee House and write this, was writing this book, and most of his time was spent there. And once in a while, when he used to kind of take a break, he used to go and meet Chiman Bhai Patel. And then at some point, Chiman Bhai Patel called him home, called him to have a whiskey once in a while with him. They both love Black Label, so they used to sit and have that. And that's how this friendship between Chiman Bhai and Jan Martel grew.
Actually, we have to add that the Indian Coffee House was just next to Chiman Bhai Patel's shop, photo shop.
So of course, the Indian Coffee House is still there, and it has become a legendary place also because of this book. But Chiman Bhai's photo shop is not there. So they used to call him, so he was called Photo Patel, basically. And I have a feeling that the name Pi Patel came somewhere, because Pi Patel is the protagonist of the Life of Pi. The name Pi Patel came from Chiman Bhai Patel.
I'm sure, 100%.
Yeah. So you see, anyway, that's the novel. That's how the book was written, and then this was 2002.
It was written in 2001 or 2.
Right, and it won the Man's Booker Prize, which is like the highest, like the Oscars of the literary works. So I got involved with The Life of Pi when this was, I'm not exactly sure which year, so 8 years before the film was made, 2002, 2004. There was Night Shyamalan. I don't know, have you heard of Night Shyamalan? Night Shyamalan is supposed to be, from an area not far from Pondi, and he's this big Hollywood director that made The Sixth Sense, I think.
He says that he was born, because in all his biographies it says M. Night Shyamalan born in Pondichéry. often he says, actually I was just born in Jipman Hospital, and that's why it says, because his parents were doctors, both his parents were doctors. So he says, I have very little kind of contact with Pondichéry, but the fact is that I was born at Jipman Hospital.
So Night Shyamalan, because maybe of this Pondichéry connection, was first attached to the film. Nothing much happened. He came here, he spent a few days, there was research, I met him once, and then there was not much that came out of it. Then I heard that Alfonso Cuarón got involved with the film, and Alfonso never came to Pondi. It was just he was there. He was at some point attached to the book to be made into a screenplay and a film, but I think it didn't go forward. So I'm coming then to the next two directors. But what happened is there was this guy called Gil Netter. Gil Netter has produced My Best Friend's Wedding and a lot of other Hollywood films. He got attracted to this book and bought the rights of this book. And with the book, once you have the rights, you take an option. So he had taken an option for maybe 2 years, and he started knocking at different studios' doors, asking if anybody would be interested in adapting this film, this book into a film. Most studios were not interested, but there was one lady, and her name is Elizabeth Gambler at Fox, who said, yes, this might be an interesting book to be adapted into film, but it's a very tough one. And how do you do it? Let's attach the right director with it. So that's when the search for the directors started. So you heard about Night Shyamalan, Alfonso Cuarón, and then came Jean-Pierre Jeunet. So Jean-Pierre Jeunet is this legendary French director, and he's done films like Adaptation, Amélie, a very long engagement. I don't know how many of those films you've seen. Beautifully shot, very quirky as a mind. So when Jean-Pierre Jeunet got involved in the film, and he just made Amélie before that, I think. He came, Amélie, you said he came, when was Amélie? I think it was early 2000s maybe, I think. Yeah. So he came here, and he came with, today, a legendary French cameraman, DOP, called Bruno Desbonnel. Bruno has shot The Darkest Hours. Every 2 years he's nominated for an Oscar. I mean, he shot Amélie, of course, and wonderful cinematographer. So Bruno and he came to Pondi, and that became, I think, the time when you really felt that The Life of Pi was going to come on screen. So they came here, spent a week. I was with them through that whole journey. So what they did is they opened the operator, the top of the operator. Both of them were standing. So the entire town knew that there were two white guys that were in an auto standing, and they were doing an entire scout of Pondichéry town. And they did this for a week. And they came with a producer who was a producer by Alexander. So also producers change. As directors start changing, producers attached to the directors start changing. So yes, Gil Netter, who had the rights to the book, automatically remains the delegate producer. But the rest of the producers could change as the movie's journey goes forward. Anyway, they do this ready. A couple of months later, Jean-Pierre Jeunet sends me this to read, and I found it. He sends me his version of the script of The Life of Pi. And wow, he wanted to shoot on the real sea with a real tiger and a real boy. And the studio said, how will you ever get this done? A real tiger in the real sea with a real boy? Impossible. And they dropped the project. And then the project went into, almost like a lock and key, and the project was completely forgotten about. By that time, I was an assistant, and then by that time I started my own company. I was producing my own stuff, and in fact, I was Alexander doing the film and adaptation of a book?
No, actually it's an adaptation.
Alexander Darinel, the film which was made at the same time that Life of Pi was being shot, the script was made from all the letters. There's a book which is published of all the letters that Alexandra wrote to her husband and his answers. It's a thick book like that. And the screenplay was based on these published letters, but it's not a novel.
So coincidentally, that film was shot exactly at the same time as Life of Pi and Pondi. I was a producer on that film, and Sunayana acted in that film. So it's very interesting that we are on the stage there. And the film was for Arte. It was a TV film, but it did extremely well. And so basically, 4 years later, 4 years after Jean-Pierre kind of, they dropped him from the project, or he dropped out of the project, I get a call saying that the project is back. And it's going to be Ang Lee that's going to direct the project. So then, the entire process started. The producers came, Ang Lee brought his screenplay writer. So that's another thing. Each of these directors had their own screenplay writers. So the screenplay writer that came with Ang Lee is David Mangy. So David Mangy basically has written this screenplay called Finding Neverland, which won an Oscar, with Kate Winslet. And he also wrote Lady Chatterley's Love, which is now on Netflix. That was one of the more controversial books of D.H. Lawrence's, no? And that basically David Mangy kind of converted into a film for Netflix. So David Mangy was attached to the Life of Pi, and he came here, and I was seeing the thoroughness. So Life of Pi, the book, is a very
It's a difficult book.
it's a difficult book. Yeah, it's yeah.
Actually, half the story takes place in the middle of the ocean, on the sea. There's a boat, there's a boy, and there's a tiger. Half the story is that. The first half, which is set in Pondichéry, goes very quickly. But more than almost half the film is that, and all the reflections of the boy as he's alone with this tiger in the middle of the ocean. There is nobody else. So it's a very difficult book when you think of making a screenplay or a movie out of that.
And I think when Yarmata wrote the book, I don't think it was researched in terms of specifics of time, timelines and stuff. But Anne wanted to make this film into a very well-researched movie. Everything he said had to have a certain background. Everything he said had to have a certain logic. So when he studied the times of when the zoo, I don't know how many of you've seen the Life of Pi? Most of you, okay. So when this whole thing happened, he had to give a timeline to it. Why did the family move from Pondichéry? Wanted to move from Pondichéry to Canada with all these animals from the zoo. So he said it during the emergency. During basically Indira Gandhi's emergency that happened. There was a part also because the ashram was such an integral part of this town, and the swimming pool basically. He said the swimming pool. I don't think the book has the swimming pool. The book has nothing to do with the swimming pool being in the ashram.
Yeah. No, he says.
In the book, he does say that I learned to swim. My uncle taught me to swim in the ashram swimming pool.
Right. Okay.
He does say that, which is actually a factual error because the ashram swimming pool is not open to the public to learn swimming.
So, these things, so adapting all these ideas into basically a screenplay. So David Mangy and came back, twice, and then researched the entire kind of book in a certain way to actually adapt it into the screen. And without that realism, if he directed the book, if he directed the film as if it was the book, I think it would have been in a completely different space. But there was one more thing that happened. By the time Anne took up the responsibility to direct the film, a lot changed in Hollywood. Basically, Avatar was made. And when Avatar was made, there was a huge change in technology that happened. So, as I think his kind of strong point, his selling point to the studio was that let's make this film, let's make it into a 3D film, and let's also make it into a film with VFX. So let's create the tiger in VFX. Let's create, most of the environment that is there on VFX. And that's what happened. And basically what happened is, this is a story from later. His vision was beyond the technology. So Anne's vision of the film was beyond the technology that existed. Especially because it was fur, which is most difficult to recreate on post-production VFX, and water. how do you create water of the sea? Because the sea water goes a certain way, it doesn't bounce back. Whenever you shoot they shot the entire film, in a kind of a pool that they had built in Taichung, which is in Taiwan. But water on those pools kind of hit the edges and come back. So this whole thing was such a complex process. And basically what happened is the VFX company, they were called Rhythm and Hues, on the day when the Oscars were announced, just a few days before that, they declared bankruptcy.
Yes.
So they lost, they were, because in post-production normally you give, package deals. And they didn't realize when giving a package deal, what could be the repercussions, because the vision was beyond the technology.
Maybe it's not clear to non-technical people. This company did the computer-generated images. They are not real images. They were created, visual effects were created on computers. And that company which created these computer-generated images actually went bankrupt, lost all its money.
So I can't remember now how well the tiger is described in the book. But what I can tell you from the film is that they got this tiger that acted in Gladiator. And they got that tiger and shot 200 hours of footage of the tiger face. Happy tiger, hungry tiger, sad tiger, angry tiger. And then they started recreating those expressions on 3D, on VFX. So it was that complex kind of a process, and finally the result, of course, was The Life of Pi, which won, I think, multiple Oscar awards, including Best Director.
Yeah.
And I was just watching an interview with the boy who played Pi, Suraj Sharma. He was asked, when you were shooting those scenes where there is a tiger with you, actually there was no tiger. How are you doing? He said, yeah, there was no tiger. I was acting as if there is a tiger. But actually the tiger was later recreated on a computer and added to the film. So while he was shooting, while he was acting, there was nothing, just plain air. He was looking at it and he was acting. So how tough.
So I've seen some pictures of Ang being the tiger. So Ang is doing this to him, and then he's kind of reacting. So Ang became the tiger very often during the shoot. And getting tired, so the fellow didn't know how to swim, Suraj. They taught him how to swim. His life completely changed because he learned so many things that he would have never learned if it was the normal process of his life. So one more incident. It's nothing to do with book to screen, but he basically came for the casting. So we were casting all over India, in all the different regions and also outside of India. And Suraj basically didn't want to come for the casting. It was his brother that was an acting student from Singapore, I think, that wanted to come and kind of give the audition. Suraj was sitting outside, and I think he was promised some ice cream after that, or a meal somewhere by his brother. And A.B. Kaufman noticed him. A.B. Kaufman is again one of the most legendary, casting directors in the world. Has done from Lincoln to huge films, Hollywood films. She noticed him and said, "Why don't we try him out?" And Suraj was born. It was completely something that was not expected at all.
I heard that you auditioned 5,000 boys. Is true?
Yeah, absolutely. Those were the numbers. Auditioning happened in every center in India and stuff. So that's in short the story of The Life of Pi. One more small little incident before I show you the next video was that we were walking on the streets and the art director was with us. So whenever you adapt anything or any screenplay, I think the first time there is a scout, there's only 3 or 4 people. Writer comes, writer, researcher. There was a researcher also on the film. They come and they normally write the first draft. After you write the first draft, so in a book, it's, I don't know, are there drafts in books also?
Yes,
A writer also goes make several drafts before they come to the final draft.
But do you send those drafts to the...
No.
Okay. So in the film world, you have to send the drafts to your producer. So producer reads draft number 1, 2, 3, 4, it could go into 10, 15 drafts. So as the drafts improve, more and more people get attached to the film. So on the second visit, there was the DOP. The DOP was Claudio Miranda, who also won an Oscar. In fact, he shot his last film that he shot was Top Gun with Tom Cruise. So Claudio was there. There was David Brockman, who was the art director. So we were all walking on the street. We were showing them the streets of Pondi and stuff. And I just pointed out to an old house, hey, this is my grandfather's house. But it is rented out to the French Institute here. There's a lady staying there. I did actually want them to, I just said that this is the house. They wanted to see it. So the house was locked. The lady, Brigitte, was in France. And then they climbed up on our assistants' backs, both Anne and David, and peeked into the house. Then they had a conversation. They said, we want to see the house. So, called Brigitte, we opened up the house. She was in France. They looked at the house. They said, this is Faye's house. This is exactly what we want for Faye's house. Then they realized that this house is too small. For today, the 3D cameras have become small. At that point, there were stereo lenses and stuff. So it was a huge setup. So they rebuilt that house. And it rebuilt it in a way that you can't make out if this house is that or that house is this. Plants were taken from India to Taiwan. They built the entire house at a different scale. So the house looked absolutely the same. So this is the level of research that that sometimes directors in Hollywood and especially Master Andy, it was.
Perhaps I should tell you, this house is actually on Romaran Street. It's on Romaran Street just after Bazar Saint Laurent. It's to the left if you are facing south.
Yeah, so that's how my connection with Life of Pi became so integrated in my the film integrated into my life completely.
So that was interesting to see how commercially books are bought and given to producers for making movies. Perhaps I should, I wanted to, it was in my mind to say that, the film Three Idiots, it was a huge success, but originally the book was written by Chetan Bhagat, and when they bought the rights, and then when they made the film, it was so different from his book, he was furious. He said, you have changed the whole thing, and he was very, very angry. And subsequently, when they made Two States, another one of his books, he wanted to be part of the team which writes the screenplay so that he, the author, can have some control over the screenplay.
Two States was shot in Pondichéry.
As well.
A lot of it. Yeah. So with the OTT platforms that have come into play and now, all these series that you see and so many book adaptations, often the work is so big that there is not one writer. There is something called a writer's room. And basically there is one chief writer, but he has maybe 5 writers, 6 writers who keep throwing ideas, who keep changing the adaptation in the way that would look best on screen. And when these 4, 5, 6 minds come together, I think the quality of the product also goes up. All these films like Trial by Fire or even Sacred Games, which got some Emmys, these were all book adaptations.
Yes.
But they were always worked on by, of course, a chief writer, but also a team of writers that sit in a writer's room and thrash out the entire book and convert it into a screenplay.
Now, we will take questions. If you have any questions, please go ahead. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question? No? Yes.
Mr. Rajendra.
Which one did you prefer, the movie or the book?
If you ask me, I prefer the movie rather than the book because the visuals were so beautiful, so extraordinary, which you could not even have imagined when you were reading the book.
I absolutely agree. It's one of the. They say it's one of the fewer movies that are
Better than
the book. But I think also I don't know if you can say better because the book and the movie they have the same soul, but they are they both kind of go to different places and then come back, because the story of the boy is basically you don't know if he's actually imagining. That's how he has survived his entire journey of being on the sea all alone. So I think that comes out, but I feel the Andy has managed to layer that so beautifully, because when my kids watch the movie, they enjoy it. I don't think they think about the philosophy behind the film. When we watch the film, we see the philosophy behind the film. So this layering of a script, I think, is a real art.
And also in the film, Andy has added something which at the end, the grown-up Pi is telling his story to the writer, which is not there in the book, but the whole part where the adult Pi tells his story is something that the filmmaker has brought, which is not there in the book.
Any other questions? Wait, let him give you the mic.
Do you know what Yann Martel thought about the adaptation? Did he like it? Because if I remember correctly, the place of the religion in the book is very, very big. The first 100 pages are about religion, the three religion, which in the film is a bit specific.
I mean, there are things that need to be fleshed out to keep an audience interested in the movie. It's very different from the book. But Yann Martel, from what I know, was I don't think he interfered, but I think he was there hand in hand, during the making of the film. So I think he was shown the film. I think he loved the film, and I think it was a kind of a collaboration without interference. Is I think what I think. I'm not completely sure, but I think it was that.
In my knowledge, Albert Einstein was one of the people with the highest IQs, and he has talked about the power of imagination over knowledge. So my question to you is that this big shift from reading to watching movies, according to you both, what effect did it have on a generation's imagination? I mean, your generation was more into reading.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
But it has affected our generation's imagination. So, how do you think? What is your take on this?
You mean to say in the context of Life of Pi? Yeah. Or in general?
In general, right?
I mean, I don't have a point of view, but I see. I mean, movies are normally spoon-fed, and the emotions are given to you. I think, and a lot of books often leave a lot of things to your imagination. Maybe you saw Pi as a different guy, Tiger as a different tiger. I mean, you are building that imagination in your head. And what movies do is basically the screenplay writer, adapts his imagination or a couple of other people's imaginations and shows it to you and gives it to you. So basically, movies are a little more, I think, spoon-fed but that's why they are also more entertaining than books in many ways. I mean, of course, an avid reader would think otherwise, but what do you think?
You see, it's a very subjective thing, and there are people. It is true that the younger generation, without being judgmental, don't read much, as I said, because it needs that extra effort to read, to use that skill of reading. Whereas when you're watching a film, you don't have to use any skills. It's just there. But I think the films also help your imagination because there are things which you have not imagined. You see, for example, when I'm reading Life of Pi, there are certain images that Annie has created of this sky filled with stars, or when he sees this ocean which is lit from inside. It encourages me to imagine more than what I can imagine as well. Even you see Harry Potter, When I'm reading Harry Potter, I imagine it in a certain way. But when I watch it on the screen, it's beyond my imagination. It has gone a step forward. And I'm sure that children who grow up watching films like this, fantasy films, etc., their imagination must be even more active. They must be able to imagine more because they are used to seeing fantastic images right from their childhood. I think so.
Any other questions? Okay, then, yeah.
In which case we will end with that. And I will say this, that Jan Martel just happened to be in Pondichéry, and he happened to notice how several religions live peacefully together, the Christians, the Hindus and the Muslims, etc. It's true that he didn't, I felt a bit annoyed that he hadn't really gone into the reality of Pondichéry and this whole thing that he put up about the zoo in the botanical garden, which never existed. And he didn't understand the significance of surnames in India. Patel is a very particular surname. You cannot, it's not a Tamil surname, it's a Gujarati surname of a particular caste. You cannot play around with names in India. You cannot take one name and give it to some character as well. And Pondichéry he must have noticed there's a strange thing about names in Pondichéry because there are, especially in the Franco-Tamil community, there are names of people which are very, which sound strange to others because you have one part Indian name, one part French name, this goes with that. It may seem really strange. To those of us who have grown up with it, it doesn't matter. But that struck him, that how come there are these strange names, And in one of the chapters he says, he met a man called something Kumar. He was a Muslim, and he met a Christian called something Kumar, and he was surprised that the same name isn't true religion. It's not true. A Muslim cannot be called Kumar ever, at all. So Jan Martel didn't get a lot of facts right. And the filmmaker who takes this book, which is itself full of such errors, can't do anything to change, because he's going to adapt that. So,
But that was a big challenge for Ang Lee and for the researcher and for David Manley. I remember we spent hours and hours on these little details, which can pass off, which cannot pass off on screen. Because on screen, then you can't fool the audience. You see, then if it is not authentic, I think then people start judging you in a very different way. So a lot of this was given a huge importance. For example, that whole Rakhi scene, it's a bit personal, but I'm going to tell you this to end. So basically, when the girl is, Pai is going to leave, and the girl puts a band around Pai's wrist. And basically, they love each other, but they want to call each other brother and sister because, So, that those little elements, these were points of discussions. I can go back to my emails, we had discussed this. And I said that often in our younger days, we used to like a girl, and it was easier to approach her by making her your sister than kind of proposing to her. So it was one of those, little things which, kind of stays in people's minds. So, yeah.
And it's true that in the book there is no girlfriend. But apparently I've read that Ang Lee said, what? He's a boy who's 16 years old? He has not a girlfriend? It's not possible. There must be a girlfriend in this whole story because that's the teenage boy's big thing. So I heard that he added that into the story, which is not there in the book.
Great. I think